Folks, I found out something that I didn't know. It goes back into the 1800s when the Russians sold Alaska to the United States. It was talked about annexing a whole part of Canada, the British Columbia and all that would connect the United States with British Columbia and Alaska. And it was thought about that at some point we was going to annex all of Canada. I didn't know that. I should have known it. But that's interesting. We would be a better country, a greater company if we had them annex Canada. I don't know. But this video is about things about people that are well known, famous people, some of them founding fathers and so on, and even Elvis Presley. So watch all of them. I'm talking about all of them. And I'm reading it right off of the internet as I talk about it. So watch the video. Maybe you'll like it. Maybe you won't. Maybe you'll agree with some of it. Maybe you won't. Some of it I do know as a fact. I don't know it because of what I'm seeing on the internet, but I know first-hand knowledge about some people, especially Johnny Cash and Elvis Presley. So watch the video. There goes that again. I've been looking at some stuff about certain famous people. People I liked. I still like them. So I found that sometimes you can't take everything to the bank that people tell you on the internet, but I found some of it's really interesting. And where I found this stuff was a piece in there that said historical figures of people lost respect for. I have lost some respect for some of these people. But like, for instance, y'all remember Steve Jobs? He died, but he was part of Apple, and he had a lot of things. But let's just say, well, here it is. Whoa, hold up, Steve Jobs, you say. The same guy who brought us Apple and changed the tech industry forever. Well, color me surprised. I knew the man was a bit of a perfectionist, but I had no idea he was also incredibly cruel. It's always disappointing to find out that sometimes someone we idolize has a dark side. And Steve's dark side was this. In the memoir of Small Fry, Steve Jobs' daughter, Lisa Brennan Jobs, writes the Apple founder was incredibly cruel. Jobs initially denied paternity and refused to pay child support. Jobs was apparently no kinder in the business world. He was known for firing employees for no reason, asking people invasive and inappropriate questions during job interviews, and refusing to offer his closest employees fair compensation and stock options in Apple, especially when it involves mistreating loved ones and employees. And while we can't deny the impact he had on the world of technology, it's also important to acknowledge the problematic behavior as well. It's not like we're short on tech geniuses today. We still admire the innovations without ignoring the flaws of the people behind them. So, but keep in mind, people that are famous are well known. They're people just like us. We all have, none of us are perfect. Another one is P.T. Barnum. You remember, that's the circus man. I always thought P.T. Barnum as a showman with the heart of gold, but it turns out he was more like a showman with the heart of darkness. I mean, experimenting on living things, locking people in cages, and mistreating animals. That's just not cool. I guess you could say his shows were a little too wild. And I went to a lot of P.T. Barnum circuses. But P.T. Barnum was due to the romanticization in The Greatest Showman. People should know that he was a maniac that did ungodly experiments on living beings, locked people in cages, abused and mocked them, all whilst earning pocket from them. Barnum also mistreated animals and often acquired animals for his circus in suspicious ways. I don't exactly know what that means, but that's just something that was said in that. In all seriousness, though, it's important to remember that history is full of flawed individuals. Even those we put on pedestals, we can still appreciate the contributions they made without ignoring the harm they caused. And with a man as cruel as P.T. Barnum, it's impossible to ignore how nasty he truly was. I don't know whether I take all that to the bank or not, but that's what it said. But that's about P.T. Barnum. Another person, I never heard of this person. Coco Chanel. Yeah, I have too heard of this person. She's a fashion icon, but she was also a Nazi lover to win favor and ensure that her fashion house would thrive throughout the war. When the Nazis took over Paris in 1940, Coco Chanel began dating Baron Hans Gunther von Dietrich, who was a German military officer. So she was a Nazi sympathizer, and she was French. Now here's one that I really know, and I've met in person. I've been to one of his concerts in 1956 at the Carolina Theater in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He did a show there. It was him, June Carter, and Justin Tubb. It was only about $1 to get in to see him. But the fact that Elvis Presley did something problematic with underage people is certainly not music to any of our ears. I mean, sure, he had those shriveling hips that all made the lady swoon, but this is just gross. I guess what they say about celebrities is true. You should never meet your idols. That's kind of true. But Elvis had during the height of his fame, Elvis Presley was the world's biggest heartthrob who was particularly beloved by teen girls. While on the road, and I don't find this hard to believe, on the road he groomed a 14-year-old and slept with her while he toured. And the reason I don't find this hard to believe is because I know about how he met Priscilla, and she was underage. I know he had a thing about that. In this case, you should never learn about the dark secrets, but in all seriousness, we can still enjoy his music without turning a blind eye to him. Harm he calls. We can learn from these mistakes and strive to do better, which makes sense to me, with other famous figures in the future. But I liked Elvis. And I met him when I was in the Army. I met him in Germany. And I asked him a dumb question if he remembered me. I said, "Do you remember me?" I was sitting there, I tell him when I was sitting in the car, I said, like he's going to remember some kid sitting there watching him in 1956, I think it was. But I asked him, man, no, sir, I don't. You know, and just to meet him and talk to him in person, he seemed like a really okay guy. Well, maybe he was, but he had this flaw about young girls. And it's pretty much common knowledge. It really is. But that was Elvis. And Mother Teresa, that more commonly known as Mother Teresa, she had some dark sides to her, but one thing that really sticks in my mind is she believed in suffering brought people closer to God, and her hospices were places for people to die in agony, but as soon as her own health was at risk, she fled to the best hospitals. She was a hypocrite and caused untold suffering that could have very easily been avoided with even basic medical intervention. I kind of knew that about her, but you know, who knows? I don't know, but that's just something that's been said about her. But and Andy Warhol, don't know much about him. But Alfred Hitchcock, he's got a dark side, and I kind of knew about this before I seen it here. Remember Tippi Hedren? She was in one of his movies, and he was sexually harassing Tippi Hedren. But he was that come out, and he was probably one of the best filmmakers ever. But it's worth mentioning how much he abused his actors, including sexually harassing Tippi Hedren. The Wright brothers, I don't recall ever hearing anything about them. I know they tried to make it harder on other people that come along after they made that first flight at Kitty Hawk. They was always standing in the way of them progressing with their version of an airplane. I remember that. Yeah, that's what it said. The Wright brothers were between them and other aviation pioneers, including Glenn Curtiss. And Curtiss made a famous airplane. and that made a blockage in aviation progress. John Lennon. I never really liked the Beatles. I liked some of their music, and I particularly didn't like John Lennon. He was a legend in the music industry, and the Beacon of Peace and Love and all that stuff. But didn't you know that he was a lousy dad? Smacking your kid at the dinner table is not a kid. And this is according to his maid. And leaving drugs lying around. And I knew he was using drugs. But Albert Einstein. He tried to force his first wife to give up their first child, and then tried and refused to acknowledge his other kids. Oh boy, this is a doozy. This is a doozy. Dr. Seuss. Let's talk about, and I knew this from somewhere else, Dr. Seuss, or should I say Dr. Sleaze. I mean, the guy was a children's author, for goodness sake. Cheating on your wife and perpetuating racist stereotypes in early work. It's like discovering that Winnie the Pooh is a grizzly bear in disguise. He cheated on his wife and had questionable racism in early work. Seuss's books have forced criticism from including characters with racial stereotypes, from a Chinese character with lines for eyes to African men wearing grass skirts. I knew that. And here's another one that Henry Ford, of course, everybody knows he revolutionized the industry and gave us the Model T, but he also had some pretty questionable beliefs. Being part of a mutual admiration society with Hitler, that's like being best friends with Voldemort. And don't even start on his creepy habit of surveilling his employees in their home. I heard that before too. Henry Ford was part of a mutual admiration society with Hitler, like I said. He wrote an anti-Semitic screed called The International Jew, was a proponent of fascism in America, and surveilled his own employees at their homes to see if they were living up to his moral standards. He was against building anything for the war effort. He finally come around. I can't remember the details on that, but but later on it become a really important part of the war effort. But that's Henry Ford. You know, he did great things. Well, this would be a lot of people's favorite actor, John Wayne. And his real name was Marion something. I can't remember the last of it. He was a Hollywood icon and a symbol of American masculinity. However, it turns out he almost got into a brawl with a Native American actress at the Academy Awards. I never heard that before. Winston Churchill, that's another person. I don't know much. I know he was part of the war effort. He was Prime Minister in Britain. There was another one in here that let's see, Alexander Hamilton, Charles Dickens, Chuck Norris. That was always a favorite actor of mine. The fact that Norris did not meet his illegitimate daughter until she was 26, despite her discovering her paternity a decade earlier, paints a pungent picture of misconnections and lost time. His daughter took a step that takes a lot of courage and was met with utter silence. Can you imagine her disappointment? I guess I could. Chuck learned he had a 16-year-old daughter from a past relationship in 1990 when she reached out to him in a letter. It took 10 years for him to meet her when she was 26. The story serves as a reminder of the complexities of personal relationships and the profound impact of our actions, of what we do or lack thereof, can have on other lives of others. So everything you do is going to affect something or somebody somewhere down the line, in one way or another, it good or bad. But he didn't want nothing to do with his children. Gandhi. I personally don't believe any of this stuff they're saying about him. Thomas Jefferson, yeah. There's a story of Thomas Jefferson's relationship with Sally Hemings, troubling reminder of the exploitation and abuse that have characterized our nation's history. Yes, our country, we started out on the wrong foot, especially when it was all men are created equal. I don't believe that people like Thomas Jefferson, George, I don't believe they believe that for a second. When they said what they would like to have said was all white men are created equal. So they certainly didn't want to include black men. But Jefferson, he kept slaves, including him, and had an affair with her when she was underage, raises serious questions. I think she was 15. It might mention that in here. Yeah, he kept slaves, even having who was underage. She was 15 and he was in his 40s when they met. Jefferson didn't free her or the children until he was dying. We've always known that the Founding Fathers weren't exactly saints, but still it's a tough pill to swallow. But you know what they say, the truth shall set you free. Helen Keller, don't know much about her. I don't know much about a lot of the F. Scott Fitzgerald. He was a writer, I believe, but he plagiarized his wife's work and locked his wife in the house when she asked for a divorce. George Washington, one of our first president. It looks like we've got another problematic historical figure on our hands. George Washington, the father of our country and the first president of the United States, was actually a slave owner who refused to free his many slaves. It's just not the kind of news you want to hear about the father of our country. When his father died, George Washington inherited 10 slaves at age 11. He went on to purchase dozens more. And when he married Martha Washington, she brought more enslaved people to their Mount Vernon plantation. As Washington moved up the ranks in politics, he began to reconsider his beliefs about slavery, but refused refused to free his many slaves even after it became legal to free them in 1782. But it's a good reminder that nobody's perfect, not even the guy on the dollar bill. We need to focus more on idolizing these historic figures and more on understanding their flaws, which we all have flaws. And here's one, Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra, without even reading this, I know he was connected to the mafia, the criminal underworld. And let's see what it says here. It says, no doubt Franklin is one of the greatest figures in the history of American music, but the story surrounding Frank Sinatra's connections to organized crime adds another layer of complexity to his larger-than-life persona. Sinatra's affinity for the company of those connected to organized crime reveals that he shared interest in a blurred line between entertainment and the hidden world of illicit activities. I've heard that all my life about Frank Sinatra. I liked his music. Florence Nightingale. What do I know about Florence Nightingale? I know she was a nurse and she had a lot to do with, let's see what it says. Yeah, it's often held up as a hero in the nursing profession, but the truth is that her legacy is much more complicated than. While it's true that she made significant contributions to infection prevention and modern nursing, the fact is she had racist views and had some involvement in colonial atrocities is deeply troubling. I don't know what she did. She was a raging racist and had some hands in genocide, but she made sure she washed her hands. Alexander Graham Bell, telephone guy. Don't know much about him. Bell believed that deaf people shouldn't be able to marry each other because it would lead to contamination of the population. Never heard that before. And Pablo Picasso, the artist, her artwork just pisses me off. I don't know what, it just don't look, it's nothing I enjoy looking at. He was a womanizer. He cheated on all his wives. He told one of the richest women our machines for suffering. He later told her there were only two types of women, goddesses and doormats. He repeatedly subjected his lovers to horrible treatment. Picasso. There you go, Picasso. Ugly, just like your art. I don't like his art. I don't get it. Abraham Lincoln. Well, he was assassinated. He was president during the Civil War. But yeah, I knew about this. He ordered the public execution of 38 Dakota Indians. Hundreds of people watched him die as punishment for the Santee Sioux uprising. And keep in mind, we stole their land. This country wasn't ours. We stole it. I believe that. I honestly believe it. Can't do anything about it now. We stole it. You can't undo it. It's like ringing it. You can't unring a bell. James Watson, he's had something to do with the DNA, but he's had racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, and he tried his genetics to back up claims that African Americans are less intelligent than whites. I remember that. Don't like that man at all. Oprah Winfrey. Well, let's see what they say about her. I like Oprah, and I'll probably still like her after this. Oh yeah, I remember this. Personal experience with Oprah Winfrey and Barnes Municipal Airport on New Year's Eve. I would say it would have to be her. She was getting on Bill Cosby's private jet, brought her and Stedman into the airport under cover of darkness to go to the Cosby estate up north. I watched from the tower as she shoved a lone child out of the way and slammed the door to the limo. All the child wanted was an autograph. I remember that. She has flaws. She has flaws. Walt Disney. There was a movie, a Walt Disney movie. The title of it was Song of the South. You never see any of that movie anymore. Never. They just buried it. They say it was racist. I watched the song. I watched the movie. I loved it. And the Uncle Remus was in there. He was a black man. And the song started off on the movie as zippity-doo-dah, zippity-day, my oh my, what a wonderful day. I remember that, but I would love to see it again to see if I could see anything. He referred to the Seven Dwarfs as a, can I say it? What it says here is an N and blank, 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 blank pile, which we all know what the N word is, and I'm afraid to say it because, and he also used a term like pickaninnies in meetings, which was old time and offensive term for black children. He was a product of the times, just like I am. I'm a product of the times. I'm not racist anymore. My goodness, there's a lot of people in here that I never... Queen Victoria, that was a mean lady. That was a mean lady. And Martin Luther King. I haven't read this, but let me tell you what it's going to be about. It's going to be about him being a womanizer and had a string of mistresses and stuff like that. That's what it's going to be at. And I don't know if I ever told anybody about it, but one time I got thrown in jail in the 60s. I was home on leave. And Jacksonville is a Navy town. A lot of Navy guys, a lot of MPs, the Shore Patrol, military police. And I was in a bar that a bunch of stuff happened, fights broke out and everything, and I got thrown in jail with a bunch of others. And I was sitting in jail. I hadn't been booked yet, and I was sitting there looking at this black man sitting on a bench right across from me with handcuffs on. And this was a white set. Back then, the jail was segregated. And it was Martin Luther King.
That's all you.
He was sitting there.
That is fucking shit I took out of my trunk.
We talked a little bit.
And you're throwing trash in it.
And I can't remember what we talked about. I just thought he was a troublemaker at that time. But let's see what it says. Martin Luther King, as a student, plagiarized passages of his dictionary. I didn't know that. Had a string of mistresses and reportedly watched as a friend and pastor raped a woman, according to recently uncovered FBI documents. King was a human being with flaws and imperfections like the rest of us. They have to acknowledge the incredible impact he had on our society, and he did have an impact. Johnny Cash. I probably know some stuff about Johnny Cash that's not going to be in here. My wife's second cousin, Marshall Grant, was part of the Tennessee Three, and that was Johnny Cash, Marshall Grant, and I forget the other guy's name. But then it turned out it was just Johnny Cash, but they was in the band. But here is what I know about Johnny Cash. He was taking care of the money for some kind of retirement fund for the group, and he was spending it. And Marshall Grant left the band and sued him. And that was my wife's second cousin. He burned more than 500 acres and nearly wiped out populations of endangered condors. He paid $82,000 in damages, which with inflation would be over $500,000 today. That's like giving someone a pack of guns to make up for burning the land of their house. But at least he tried to make things right. That's all I got to say about him. He used drugs. And I have met him in person. I've met him in person. He come to Marshall Grant's daddy's. His daddy was Will Grant. And that was his daddy. It said he should have written a song about it, like I walked the line and started a fire. Maybe not. That's not bad. They didn't mention a lot of things they could have mentioned. Aristotle, I don't believe. Chuck Berry, his personal life, he was a sleazeball. I'm not even going to read that. He spent almost 2 years in jail because he transported a young girl across state lines for immoral purposes. He was accused of filming a woman while they were in the bathroom in 1988. Teddy Roosevelt. He opposed slavery, which was pretty revolutionary to do so during that time. And he loved nature. He was all about that and hating black and indigenous people. He was a white nationalist and a fan of eugenics. And while he was an opponent of slavery, he believed America was a land for racially superior people descended from Europeans. That's not good. Frank Lloyd Wright, he was an architect. I ain't even gonna read that. I'm not interested in that. Miles Davis, that's a black. He played a trumpet. Joe DiMaggio, he married Marilyn Monroe. Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. I don't know anything bad about him, but he thought mental hospitals were grim, but shining up your spouse in the basement, he did that. I heard that. King Edward VIII, he was the king that abdicated to marry a divorcee, Wallis Simpson. But he was sympathy. He had a lot of sympathy for the Nazis in Germany. He was all about making friends, but buddy, you really picked the wrong crowd to do so, plotting with the Germans to reclaim the throne after a British invasion. In other words, he figured the Germans were going to defeat England and take over the government, and he was going to be, it said, with the Germans to retake the throne in the event of an invasion and conquest of Britain. He wasn't just a lovesick romantic who gave up his kingdom for a woman. I don't know. Andrew Jackson, big time slave owner, I remember that. Andrew Jackson, he's always presented as a common man spirit, but he treated the Native Americans terribly. He also had a huge rowdy party and trashed the White House. His brutal and inhumane policy demonstrates the deep-seated racism and prejudice that was prevalent in Jackson's era. As we continue to grapple with issues of race and inequality in our society, it's important to remember that history is complex, for sure. Lyndon Johnson. I didn't know this. Lyndon Johnson is a presidential powerhouse and a master of personal space, but LBJ sure had an interesting way of measuring people's feelings toward him. I mean, who needs a handshake when you can just whip out the old cucumber, in other words, his penis, and water the nearest Secret Service agent, right? Talk about making a splash in here. You know, I don't doubt that one bit. That's probably true. You know, he was sitting on the toilet taking a dump, talking to some other country's premier or prime minister or something, sitting on the damn toilet. I didn't like Bain. He was known for violating people's physical space to gauge how they felt. But one time, he reportedly pulled out his cucumber out on the ground, just beat on the nearby Secret Service man without blinking an eye. I probably, if I'd been the one who pissed on, I'd have probably cold-cocked him. There's been consequences. Man. Who is this? Was that all of them? No, wait a minute. Who is this? I guess that was all of them. Anyway, it just goes to show you, we all got flaws. And I guess down the line somewhere they'll be talking about people like Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, Al Gore, and I'm sure Donald Trump would be in there somewhere. But none of us are perfect, folks. We all have drawbacks. It just, now I don't know how much of this stuff is true and not true. I suspect a lot of it's true. I suspect a lot of it's hearsay. I don't know. But I find it interesting. You know, I found out some stuff here that I think's really ridiculous. It's terrible. But our country did get started with stolen land. This whole country is like that. Also, I found out